of the City of Buenos Aires, thank you for joining us today. A quick practical note before we begin. We'll have a coffee break at 10:15, so no need to watch the clock, because we will. Let me introduce our speakers today. Graham Seed, who will be present via video, works at the intersection of multilingualism, language assessment, and the CEFR. As Secretariat Manager of Association of Language Testers in Europe, he has been deeply involved in international research on how the CEFR is operationalized in real assessment contexts where theory meets reality. Pablo Toledo, here, is an English teacher, teacher trainer, and a leading voice in language assessment in Latin America. A former president of LALTA, he brings a perspective that connects international frameworks with local policy and classroom practice. And yes, today is his birthday. So, the seminar already comes with a celebratory tone. We'll have a chance to wish him well during the coffee break. So together, Pablo and Graham, they invite us to look beyond labels and myths and engage with the CEFR for what it really is, a shared language for thinking clearly about teaching, learning, and assessment. If you ever thought, I know about the CEFR, but you're exactly in the right room. So, the floor is yours, Pablo.
Thank you very much. Okay, I thought... Está usando la voz de patio. So, I did feel I was making a little bit more of an effort, but this is such a great auditorium that it was really helping. As I was saying, today we're going to scratch the surface. We're going to scratch, but it's going to be a very broad surface. The Common European Framework of References for Languages, that's the full name, CEFR for short, is many, many things. It has many, many components, and it shows up in many, many, many ways. Today, we're going to focus on understanding what it is, some of the things inside it. We're going to do some hands-on work, beginning to talk about things like how would you recognize levels, or where would you go and look for information. But this is meant to be 100% an introduction. We're going to present some ideas, and this is basically about sharing that information and having an opportunity to work together on that, to see where there are questions, to see what ideas you already bring, and what ideas you can take out which were different. The Common European Framework is interesting for two reasons. I mean, it's interesting, or the reason we're talking about it today is basically two. Number one, that although, I mean, if you look at Latin America, most countries in South America have adopted the Common European Framework of References nationally for policy levels, and sometimes even with a status of legal recognition. Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Uruguay, all of those countries have explicit documents, legislation, etc., that says that they are adopting the framework and that they're going to align their objectives with the framework in a number of ways. That they are adopting and adapting, it's not a coincidence that there is only one letter difference between the two words. Because when you And we're going to be talking about that, how the framework is not something that you just press a button and it's here and it's doing everything for you. But for instance, if you think of the countries I was saying, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, most countries in South America, when they state that we are going to leave secondary education with a level of A2, B1, that we have a policy to have X% of a population reach level B2 by age or by year XYZ. Argentina is not going down that route, but two things. Ciudad de Buenos Aires is. And so we are, and number two, the framework is already embedded in a number of instruments that we do use. Even if you are in an area of Argentina where the framework has not been adopted or where there are other standards, you are already engaging with the framework in a number of ways. When you use a course book these days, most of the course books, not to say all of the ones that are sort of in currency, have things like A2, B1, B2, A1. We don't talk about elementary, pre-intermediate, intermediate, upper intermediate, beginner. We use this language. So we are already engaging with that in some way. So it is very important to have an understanding of what it is for everybody. But for you working here in Buenos Aires, it is absolutely essential because it has already been adopted, it is already here. So we're going to be looking at it, and we're going to be looking at it from a number of angles. But let's begin with where we are now. So, 2 questions for you. I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then we'll see what you think. On a scale of 1 to 10, so let's do this on a kind of gut feeling. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think you know the Common European Framework of References for Languages right now? So I'm going to start calling from 0 to 10, from 1 to 10, and then you raise your hands if you feel you are more or less there, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're in the middle. Okay, everybody goes for the safe middle, right? There's always the bell thing. 6, 7, 8, so 8, good, we have experts. 9, 10, no, it's expected, don't worry. I know people who will be at a 10, but that's not me, and if it's any of you, please come here. So, another question, this one is for you in pairs. One thing you already know about the framework, one thing you would like to find out today, okay? Have a couple of minutes, think about that. Go ahead. Okay, so let's begin with some of the ideas that, some of the things you know. Okay? Would any volunteers? No right or wrong answers at this point. 2023, okay, we'll talk about that. Okay, so one thing we know, it started in 2023. We will talk about dates and we'll talk about different moments. Which countries are okay with that? So the way we're going to work today is we have, well, Graham Seed is not here. So he has recorded some videos and we will be working with videos and activities. So in the first video, he's going to be talking about the general introduction to that. After that, we can get back to your question. Someone else? Someone over here?
What we said,
Please.
what we said is that we like this idea of adopting and adapting. It has to be adapted to the context. And then what we would like to know is whether you use it for assessment of progression. The descriptors are, if they are can-dos, then you need to work towards the following descriptors.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so one thing, adapting, yes. And actually, there is no way of adopting the framework where you don't do a lot of work. There is no way of the framework is not plug and play. The framework is not, this is what it is, now this is what you have to do. Actually, although many critics of the framework say that the problem with the framework is that it says too much, there is this preconception that a framework is, this is A, this is B, this is C, this is how you go, here, 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 there. When you begin working with a framework, when you actually engage with a framework, you can have the opposite problem, which is that it leaves a lot of open ends. Not open ends, but areas for you to determine. It is purposefully open. To begin with, because it is a framework for languages, not one language. So when you are beginning to use it in one language, you have to do a lot of work to to map different things in whatever it is that you're doing to what is there. But then, because it doesn't tell you what to do, and it doesn't tell you how to do it, that is for you. It is meant to be that. So a lot of myths about the framework have to do with, it is like a straitjacket. It is like, this is meet your new boss. And it is very much the opposite of that. And sometimes it is very frustrating because you would like it to be more like, oh, come on, so what is this? What do I do now? And the framework is going to look at you very zen and say, it is going to be what you want it to be. It is what you make with it. So there is no way of adopting the framework that is not that. If you want to go one step beyond, some countries have, Japan is one example, where they have the CFRJ. So what they did is they took the framework and they said, okay, this works, we want to do this for a number of reasons. We are going to produce our own version because there are things that to us are relevant. But actually for maybe the opposite reasons of what some of you might be thinking. This is more like a text-based culture with a long tradition of more rigid things. And actually their problem is they wanted to make it more communicative in some ways, but actually we would look at that and say less communicative in other ways. You can change it in a number of ways, but there is no way you just say, okay, this is what I'm going to do from now on. If you wanted to do that, then the CFR is not for you. One more, maybe, somebody dying to, maybe? Bring it on. I don't follow, sorry. The answer to that will become clear in a minute. Because it's the same thing with if you work with can-do descriptors, and we all do, they are very frustrating in a way, because you know what you want to look for, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how to identify it. So if I give you a descriptor, if I give you a can-do statement like, can understand a simple conversation that would happen in a shop, does that tell you exactly what to look for? It is specific, but what you want to be looking for, how you are going to grade that, is that in the descriptor? No, it's not there. Then you need to do your homework is, okay, this means this, knowing or using these phrases, having this kind of attitude, managing the conversation in this way, having these behaviors. So it's going to unpack into a number of things. But the descriptor is not giving you those things. The descriptor is describing one thing. The descriptor doesn't say you have to be 1 meter and 1.6 meters to use this right. It says you have to be able to, whatever. Well, I chose an example and then I cannot think of a good descriptor for that. But a descriptor will be, can manage the machinery, can manage the equipment, can operate the equipment. It doesn't tell you that you have to be this tall, that you need this certification, that you have to know this, that you have to practice that, that you have to demonstrate that. No can-do descriptor is going to give you that level of detail. You have to unpack that. So anytime you work with can-do statements, and the power of descriptors is that level of open-endedness. It's not giving you a list of things, a list of boxes to tick. No descriptor is going to do that. But if you're thinking of assessment, progression, etc., there are boxes and you have to be looking for those things. It's not all there is, and it's not the spirit of what you are looking for. And descriptors are basically, this is not about checking boxes. This is about looking beyond that. But you're going to need some level of that.
Could it be that the descriptor are sort of paths that we are able to give us support and to look for the capabilities and the skills that the student have to develop?
Very much that. A descriptor is trying to capture, so the notion of competence is, in education, is not simple and it is not unproblematic. So there are lots of conversations and very heated arguments about competence is a good idea or not. We're looking at competence versus knowledge, The Common European Framework is a competence-based model. And it defines competence, obviously based on knowledge, behaviors, and attitudes. A descriptor is trying to capture things at the 3 levels. And a descriptor is also not a list of things you have to know, which is many myths about the framework have to do with you have to know this. You have to demonstrate this, and if you tick enough boxes, you are A2, B1, C1. Actually, the framework is more about defining aims for communicative competence. It's a model of communicative competence. And it's about defining what makes it, how you can define different levels. It's a number of things, but sorry, I'm digressing, time is ticking, and we have a number of things to do today. We could be having this conversation for 3 hours or 6, but then that wouldn't leave my friend Graham time to give us some of his ideas. And actually, many of the questions that came up now are going to be addressed by him. So how about we give him a chance? So, introducing the framework, this is Graham.
Hello everybody, buenos dias a todos. Hi, my name is Graham Seed and I am delighted to be here with you via a video today. My thanks goes to Pablo Toledo, who is guiding you through your sessions today, and the whole team there in Argentina for working this program out. And although, of course, I would love to be with you in person, you'll have me via video, which I hope is okay as well. So I'm going to now share my slides with you and take you through the first of today's videos as we are looking at the CFR and what that means for you in Buenos Aires. Just to introduce myself, my name is Graham Seed, and I'm a Senior Research Manager in the English Division of Cambridge University Press and Assessment. And I've had a career in teaching English as a foreign language, first as a teacher, then a Director of Studies, and then I got involved in assessment in particular, and moved to Cambridge 17 years ago now, and worked in the departments responsible for the design and delivery of our assessments. And then in the last 8 years or so, I've been working in the research department, looking into all aspects of education and language assessment. And one of my areas of specialization is the CFR. So today you have me in 4 short videos. Here are the 4 videos that I appear in, and then Pablo will obviously be taking you through some activities you can do together in between those videos. So the first video is about the introduction and principles to the CFR. And throughout all of today, I want you to be thinking about this. How does what I talk about today and what you discuss today, how does that shape your teaching and assessment where you are in Argentina? It's very nice for me to present things here. I'm in Cambridge. Today I'm working from home, actually. But what does this mean for you in your context with your students? And that really has to be the guiding principle of today. Throughout all the videos, and this is the first one, we're going to look at the principles of the CFR and give you a little introduction to it. So, some questions to start with, and these are questions that we in Cambridge often get asked from organizations all around the world. For example, how do we monitor English language education in our school system? How do we know if it's working well or not? Are our school children progressing well in their English learning? Are they actually learning English that is going to be useful for them in real life? How can we compare meaningfully? We want to compare between different learners, how they are progressing, maybe even different schools, how they are doing, and sometimes even between different countries, and sometimes between different languages, not just learning English, but the learning of other languages as well. And what can we use that's internationally recognized? Now, your answer to some of those questions will be something to do with making sure that you have a clear plan of where you and your learners are going. And by having a clear plan, you can check their progress. And that's why people develop curricula, they develop courses to fit into this curricula, and they develop assessments to check their learners' progression throughout the course. And that's very good, that's very noble, but we need a framework to help guide us. And the CFR is one of those frameworks, and obviously it's the one that we are going to talk about today. Because, as the companion volume to the CFR says, fundamentally the CFR is a tool to assist the planning of curricula, courses, and examinations by working backwards from what the learners need to be able to do with the language. So that's the starting point. What do they need to do with the language? And then develop the curricula and assessments as a result of that. Now, the CFR, you probably know, is this document here. It originally was published in this blue book on the left here in 2001 after a decade or more than one decade of research and discussion and working with practitioners on the ground. And then in 2020, we had the companion volume released, and that is also available in a number of languages, including Spanish, and you can freely access that online, and you'll have the link to that today. The CFR is increasingly becoming the international standard for language education, for knowing proficiency in language education. Like our USB stick or our USB adapters, has become the international standard on manual data transfer. And so the CFR also is now an international standard, internationally recognized and used, not just in Europe, where it originated, but all across the world, especially including Latin America. Although it's an international standard, it is also important for applying locally. And that is what has been done here in Buenos Aires. And the Ministry of Education here in Buenos Aires has developed this document, which I'm sure you are aware of, in applying the CFR to the context that you find yourselves in there in Argentina. And it's really well done. And this is one of the key things about the CFR. By the way, I've got my copy here. I forgot to show that. That's my hard copy of the actual CFR companion volume. One of the most important things about the CFR is that it can be, in fact, should be applied to the context that people find themselves in. It's not meant to be something prescriptive. You can amend and adjust it as you see fit, and rightly that's what's happened here in Buenos Aires. Now, if you know something about the CFR, you will probably know about the level system going from pre-A1, A1 for those just starting their language learning journey, all the way up to C2 for the most proficient language learner. And remember, this could be any language, not just English. Now, the authors of the CFR companion volume compare learning a language like a rainbow, in the sense that a rainbow is a spectrum of color. It is actually impossible to say where one color finishes and the next one begins. It's blurred as the color changes. But there are discernible colors within it, and we often simplify a rainbow into 6 or 7 colors for ease about talking about the rainbow and which colors appear in that rainbow. And that's a really lovely analogy of language proficiency in a learner as they develop, as they get better in English or whichever language they are using. Their proficiency develops gradually, and actually it's blurry. You can't quite tell the edges between B1 and B2, for example. But it is more or less possible to pick out the general areas of proficiency. You can clearly say that one person is better than another. And to simplify talking about language proficiency, we have that CFR scale, and that helps us describe a language learner's proficiency. But, of course, there will always be nuances between the levels, and that's okay. The CFR level system, therefore, is a tool to measure progression. So you can say, for example, I know English at C1 level, I also know Chinese at B1 level, therefore my English is better than my Chinese. And therefore, the next step that I want to get to in English is moving up to C2, whereas in Chinese, I'm not so ambitious yet. My next step is B2. So a question for you to think about, what CFR levels are you in the languages that you know? I guess you know English. You obviously know Spanish as your home language, probably. Maybe you know other languages as well. And you don't have to say, I speak German, meaning that you have to be fluent in German. You can say, yeah, I know a little bit of German. I'm A2. Well, that's great. That's fantastic. And we should really value anyone who has started to learn any other language. A question we often get asked is, how long does it take to get from one level to the next? The answer is, well, it really depends. It's impossible to give a specific number of hours it takes a learner to get from one level to the next. It depends on many different factors. It depends on the learner themselves, how motivated they are, how many opportunities they get to practice the language, to use the language, to study the language. There's a general principle, though, that it tends to take a shorter amount of time to move from one of the lower levels, let's say A1 to A2, than it does to move from one of the higher levels, for example, from C1 to C2. And that's because the range of language is a lot broader at the higher levels. The CFR level system is also useful for comparing. We've already compared this fictional person's English ability against their Chinese ability. We can compare different learners. So Sofia is a C1 level at English and Santiago is a B1 level at English. We can compare within languages. So one person's ability to use speech in English might be C1, and the same person's ability to write in English may be a different level, B1. And the CFR really encourages making sure we use this system at a slightly more granular level as well. Don't just say English, my English is C1, but say, okay, in speaking and writing and reading and listening, for example, break it down a bit. Are you a different level at one of those skills than the other? That's called profiling. And you may also like to do this in different domains of English as well. So in conversational English may be stronger, i.e. the language that you use in everyday scenarios, but in academic English it might be weaker, or in business English it might be different again. So basically there are different levels for different purposes. And I just want to highlight this point with an example of a tool that we've developed at Cambridge. It's probably not so useful for you, but I just point it out as an example. The Workplace English tool is a tool designed for employers to go through. It guides them through certain statements to help identify which CFR level a particular employee is at or should be at in order to do a job. And it breaks it down by skill, saying that in different skills, writing, speaking, listening, reading, it may be appropriate to have different levels. So profiling again. So the CFR is useful for talking about progression. The CFR is useful for comparing. Here are the Cambridge exams, for example, and we've mapped them onto different levels of the CFR. And we have, for example, two tests that are at the same level but for different purposes. So A2 Key for schools, for example, and A2 Key. A2 Key is general English. A2 Key for schools is the same level of English but more suitable for younger learners. The CFR, the approach behind the CFR is all about describing real-life language use. So, language as a vehicle for communication rather than as a subject just to study. Can our learners actually use English, or whichever language you're talking about, in the real world to communicate, often through speaking, but also in writing, and to communicate receptively by reading things and hearing things? The CFR talks about the learner as a social agent, meaning they have agency, they can do things in a social setting. So they use the English with other people or in contexts that other people have contributed to. Maybe in the past, if you're reading something that somebody wrote, okay, it was somebody who wrote it. And obviously socially, in conversational settings, that's obvious. The CFR talks about an action-oriented approach. So it's all about the language user, the language learner, doing something, acting, having action, having agency to do something, to communicate. The CFR is very much based on the communicative approach to language assessment. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but basically it shows that since the 1970s, 1980s, there has been a move in language pedagogy to talk about communication and how learners learn languages for communicative purposes. These purposes need to be authentic, they need to be grounded in the real world. We also think about social factors, as I just said, cognitive factors about how learners process language in their brains and then what happens as a result. We focus on the importance of learner autonomy, so again, giving them agency in their own learning and helping them to develop that themselves. In combining learning and assessment, seeing that as one thing rather than two separate elements in the learning system. So assessment very much being integrated into learning. And now, of course, seeing the usefulness of digital resources and using language digitally in digital formats is also, of course, incredibly important in the modern world. So I'll just summarize that communicative approach that the CFR takes here. This is my summary, by the way, not the CFR's. And I hope you agree with this, or to what extent do you agree with this? We want to facilitate an English learner's ability to communicate in real-world tasks. Now, obviously in the classroom, sometimes that has to be a mock real-world task, but nevertheless it's modelled on real life. We want to bear in mind, of course, not just the linguistic aspects, but the social and the cognitive and the digital aspects of communication. And then assessment needs to be integrated within learning, feeding into and stemming out of learning, and promotion of learner autonomy, as I said. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Are your learners learning English actually to communicate in real-life settings, or are they just learning English because it's a school subject and it's a bit boring? How can we encourage our learners to learn communicatively? And that's the question I'll leave you with for the moment. See you in a bit.
So, this was an introduction to what is in the framework. So, a question back to you, thinking back to the conversation we were having immediately before I pressed play here. So, what is one thing in the video that confirmed what you thought about the framework? Anything that comes to mind? That we use it for communication, that is very much grounded on the idea of language as communication, and then if you want to explore, and if it's the kind of thing that you enjoy, the idea of social agency and what it means in the framework, that it is a framework of language users, and it's the word that is always used in the framework. As social agents, there is a lot to dig. There are a lot of really, really interesting and challenging ideas in there. Another thing that confirmed what you thought? Or that you said, oh yeah, this is just what I was expecting. Working with real-life settings, with real-life language use. And there was someone at the back.
Yes. I was thinking that users are not steady necessarily, and so the profiling aspect he mentioned is something that I confirmed and agreed with.
So real language use and the idea of, in assessment, we call that a jagged profile. Because if you look at different skills or sub-skills or domains of language, you can see that people think, oh yeah, when we say that someone is A2, we're thinking, oh, everything is here. If you start breaking it down, it is always doing this. This is what we call a jagged profile, because it looks like a seesaw. So in each language, as Graham was saying, you can look at this as a way of comparing different languages, but also different domains, different skills, different sub-skills. And that is a consequence of language use. Graham was actually presenting the example of someone's conversational English being here, someone's academic English being here. And this might be someone who lives and operates every day in an English-speaking environment. But if you are a researcher at university, you don't use English every day as a conversational tool, but you engage with written academic English in a number of ways. You read papers in English, you read things in your subject domain in English, you write and publish in English. But then if you have a conversation about where is the bathroom and what time does the bus arrive, suddenly your English level drops. So this is because your language use is different. So different ways of using language shape different profiles. And the framework is about basically giving you lots of tools to recognize that and to set your expectations. Graham was giving the example of profiling different roles. The framework starts with the idea of, one thing he didn't say, the framework is developed by an organization called the Council of Europe. And it is one of the things that the Council of Europe does. The project for what is going to be the framework begins in the 1970s with a very specific need. Europe was moving towards a model of integration. And one of the barriers is, we want to recognize language plurality, we want to recognize multilingualism, and we want to enable people to make fair and principled decisions about language. So we need, if we're going to say that to do this job you need this level of language, or to be admitted at this university you need this level of language, we would like to have some common understanding of what it means so that people can plan and live their lives. So at its core, sort of one of the things that the framework does instrumentally, one of the uses of the framework is we would like to be able to set a level for whatever language you speak, whatever language you will be studying in, to say this is the level that you need to enter a graduate university course, a postgraduate university course. And this is one of the most common uses of the framework. If you are going to study at a university that works within the system of Bologna, the European university space, B2 is the level at which you can enter an undergraduate course. C1 is the level that is required for a postgraduate course. Whatever the language, Italian, Hungarian, German, English, Spanish. And there are tools to sort of operationalize that. There are tools to look at, to help you progress to those levels if you need that help, and to help determine where you have met that level for that specific domain. So usually tests, usually assessment tools. And they are developed by different organizations. The framework is sort of very much a shared effort. Representatives of all major languages in Europe, of all the official languages of Europe. So Cambridge, the University of Cambridge, we are one, but there is also the British Council, the Alliance Française, the Istituto Italiano di Cultura, the Goethe, Instituto Cervantes. They are all part of the team that does this, so that it is not an English framework, or that it's not a framework for this language or that language, and so that it doesn't become about you learn the simple past and then you learn the present perfect. It's very much not that. Now, a couple of myths and realities. So the CFR is a European tool to assess English. It originates in Europe, it has been adopted around the world. And the competency scriptures apply to all languages. This is where I said it gets frustrating, because at some point you would like to have a tool that says, well, but when do I teach? At which stage do I teach this adjective? At which stage do I teach the difference between interested and interesting? or the difference between simple present and past, and simple past, or past perfect. When do I plug in reported speech? The framework is not going to give you that. You will see moments where, for instance, it says you have to be able to, a user at this level can talk about things that happened, or can tell story, can make narrations. To do that, you need to incorporate certain tenses and certain vocabulary and certain structures and certain connectors and certain blah, 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 blah. But that is a consequence of the descriptor. That is not in the descriptor. Does this make sense? It is in a way, I mean, can do leads you to functionalizing language, yes. But not the way the CFR does it, but it brings you to that space. CFR is just for assessment. It's basically a tool that you use to design tests, or to say you have met the standards. It's a teaching and learning tool. So you can use it to design your curricula, to say what am I going to include in this course, what am I going to include in this level, what is going to be my goal, how can I describe my goal for this year, or primary school, or this course in academic English for people in higher education. It helps you set learning goals, and it helps you adapt classroom activities or create classroom activities. It is a Swiss knife. It really opens lots of doors. It's an action-based social approach, and it extends the communicative perspective. If you're thinking of the communicative approach the way, sort of in the old-fashioned school, the Henry Widowson communicative approach, what the CFR brings in a lot is it opens up the dimension of social, the social linguistics aspects and the idea of language use. It's not about language features, it is more about being able to do things in language. So it is very much an activity-based thing. What things do we do with language? One part of it doesn't really concern much with how you do it, but do you do it? The CFR levels correspond directly to grammar points and vocabulary lists. That there is like a secret vocabulary list that is A2 and another secret vocabulary list that is B1. And then if you use this thing, you are sort of adding scores and moving more into the B1 space. Levels describe what a person can do with language, not what language they should use or they should know. There are, and we will see them in a few minutes, sort of descriptors for things like grammar, pronunciation, etc. But you will see that they're very generic. They don't say this. For many of the uses, if you want to actually use and implement the framework, yes, you will need to develop that. If you want to use the framework in a language that has never, sort of, where you are the first person to use it, or if you want to use it in your particular context, then you are going to need to know, okay, so what do I do in my first course? What do I do in the second year? What should I be including in a 4-year language development plan? So you are going to have to develop those things, but the framework is not about this is the list. The framework is actually one of the projects that, for English, we have things, and we will mention them later, called the vocabulary profile, the grammar profile. So there has been a number of organizations, we have come together and said, okay, we're going to put together a corpus, and we're going to look at millions and millions and millions of texts, and that we have an agreement are at this level, this level, this level, and then we are going to create profiles and say that this kind of grammar structure, this word usually shows up more starting from this level, it becomes more prevalent. We need that because we need some kind of progression. We need to create curriculum. We need to sort of create those lists if we are going to use the framework. But the framework doesn't give you that. And this is one of the areas in which the framework is not something you just adopt and it does everything for you. This is where the framework is giving you a lot of homework. The framework doesn't tell you, this, and this is what you want to check. This specific thing is what you want to check to say if someone is B2, C1, C2, whatever. The framework is telling you the person can do this. You are going to have to determine what, for you, meets that criteria. Is this making sense? Grammar and vocabulary lists are in the CFR and are useful for some purposes, but are not what the framework is about. CFR levels are linear steps that all learners pass through in the same way. That's another myth. The CFR maps outcomes, not the path or the sequence of learning. This Chomskyan idea, now that Chomsky has shown to be not the nice guy everybody thought he was, we can criticize him freely. This Chomskyan idea of a set progression for language development that follows the hardwired structures in the brain, the CFR is the opposite of that. You get there however you get there. Actually, the CFR is very recognizing of things like translanguaging and plurilingualism. It doesn't care that your grammar is great. It cares that you can do things with language with whatever tools you have. It doesn't care that you translanguage, that you use bits from different languages, as long as you can operationally do those things, as long as you can act in language. Progress is never linear and uniform. We are not teaching English, we are teaching people. So people are different, and then we were talking about language domains, how you develop different things depending on your language use, what you use language, what experiences you have, what your engagement with English is. The CFR doesn't tell you what to teach, the CFR doesn't tell you how to teach it. Well, it does tell you that you would prefer to teach it communicatively, because it does give you a framework in the sense of a philosophy of language use. But it doesn't tell you what to do now and exactly how to do it. Perfect grammar and elaborate vocabulary are signs of an advanced CFR level. If I want to be at the B2, C1, C2 levels, I need to be perfect. Actually, no. The CFR is concerned with communicative ability, not grammatical accuracy or the range of vocabulary. To do certain things in certain ways, then you need the range of the vocabulary. Classic example is, do you have to have perfect English and beautiful pronunciation if you're going to be a teacher of English? Well, I mean, it is acknowledged that nobody's perfect and we are all learners of the language. However, in the classroom, you're going to be a model of the language. So you need to have a level of proficiency that can operate as a model. At the same time, we are models of bilingual users, unless you happen not to speak any other language than English. Now, or for instance, for the kind of thing I am doing right now, I'm speaking in public, I'm talking about an elaborate thing, and I would like you to project an idea of, I am a competent person. If I come here and my language is not good enough, it does not meet your expectations for somebody doing what I am doing, then I cannot do what I am here to do very well. And my problem is not that I don't know the words or my pronunciation this or my grammar that. My problem is I am creating the wrong impression, and that is stopping me from doing the thing that I need to do. The problem is not that your pronunciation is not perfect, the problem is that I cannot know if you are talking about a boat or an animal, so sheep, sheep, which, is it ship or is it sheep? And if you studied with a book, you get extra point. What would you like to eat, Edith? Anybody knows what comes next? Nobody? So disappointed. A meat sandwich or a cheese? Ship or sheep? Nobody studied that? ¿Dónde están los del Joaquín? Vamos. So, okay. All right. Your memories, people. Appropriacy and managing effective interaction with other users are at the core. It's about being appropriate, it's not about being correct. Sometimes being correct is being appropriate. Okay? Is this making sense? Okay. So So moving on into the next area, and looking at my clock for a minute. All right. So, what is in the CFR? Let's get down to the levels, the scales, the descriptors. Because all of this is very nice, but we have to get our hands dirty and just begin doing stuff. So, how do you do stuff? Let's hear Graham.
Hi again, welcome back. So our second video is all about what's actually in the CFR, and we are going to look at the levels, the scales and descriptors in the CFR. If that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. I'll talk you through it in a minute. So the CFR is made up of lots of descriptors, so sentences that describe language ability. And they are all positively worded. They all are can do. That's how it's described. Descriptors which start with the word can. So it focuses on what the learner can do at a particular level rather than what they cannot do. So here's an example here of a scale of overall written production. So this is a scale. There are many of these in the CFR. Okay, remember this is my big book of the CFR companion volume. And in this book there are lots of these scales. And this is just one of them, which is about writing, producing things in writing. What can a learner do when it comes to writing? So, overall written production is the name of the scale. And we have our levels again, so we have pre-A1, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, and C2. C2, remember, is the most proficient. And we have descriptors at each of these levels, talking about what a learner can do at a particular level. And they are called illustrative descriptors because they illustrate the sorts of things that a learner can do at that level. They're not prescriptive, they are illustrative, so you can adapt them as needs be. Let's have a look at this one here. It's quite small, I know, but maybe you can see on screen. So for overall written production at A2 level, it says that a learner can produce a series of simple phrases and sentences linked with simple connectors like and, but, and because. So if your learners can do that, if they can produce a series of simple phrases and sentences linked with simple connectors like and, but, and because, you know that they are A2 level English. Or let's say they are at least A2 level English. Maybe they are higher than that. Or let's say they are A2 level English in their writing production. Because remember, maybe their speaking or their reading may be a different level, and that's okay. So there are loads of these scales in the CFR companion volume. Here's another one. It's a speaking one, informal discussion with friends. And let's have a look a bit more closely at those lower levels. They're the levels that probably your students are at. So we can see here, for example, we don't have descriptors at pre-A1. They start at A1 level. At A1, in informal discussion with friends, so conversation with friends, an A1 level learner can exchange likes and dislikes. What do you like? What do you not like about sports and foods, etc. They have a limited repertoire of expressions, and you have to speak to them clearly, slowly, and directly, but then they can do that. And at A2 level, they are obviously able to do more things. I'm not going to read all of these out. You will see also that at A2 level, we have some descriptors below a little line here in the middle. I don't know if you can see that there's a little white line in the middle of A2 level. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 descriptors above that little white line. and that's a higher level of A2. So the ones above the line are A2 plus, let's say. Now, in Buenos Aires, for example, what they have done is that they've taken the CFR descriptors and that they have put them into an appropriate context for your learners and what they need to do in the curriculum that's there in Buenos Aires. So I'm sure you have this document, and the hard work has already been done for you in making sure that the general CFR descriptors have been thought about in your context in the school system in Buenos Aires. Now, when we talk about skills and competences in general, we often think about reading, listening, writing, and speaking. And sometimes we divide speaking into spoken production, so what I'm doing now, I'm just producing language, and then spoken interaction, what you will do after this video, you will talk to one another, and you will obviously need to listen and think about what somebody else has said and then respond to what they are saying. So you're interacting with them. In fact, writing is also written production and written interaction. Think about text messages, WhatsApp, online forums, that sort of thing. That's written interaction. So we tend to divide language proficiency into these skills, don't we? Cambridge does in its assessments, and these terms are very familiar, aren't they? We know what reading means and what writing means, etc. Now, what about grammar and vocab? They are not skills, and they don't feature so heavily in the CFR, although they are there. Grammar and vocabulary are very useful building blocks when we want to create language. My children absolutely love Lego. I don't know whether that's the same for you. So there is lots of Lego all about the house. And like Lego, grammar and vocabulary are useful building blocks. They're the useful tools. However, when my children leave Lego about the house, I end up stepping on it. And that's quite painful. And I think that's a good picture as well for grammar and vocabulary. If you just leave grammar and vocabulary lying around, if you just learn grammar and vocabulary, but you don't put them together, it's not very useful, and in fact it can be painful. What we need to do is to build the grammar and vocabulary into something, into those skills. So reading, writing, listening, speaking, when we use grammar and vocabulary in those skills, that's actually more communicative, and that's the communicative approach that I talked about in the last video. So grammar and vocab, useful building blocks, but only when together and in the right place, in the right context, obviously. Now, the CFR actually doesn't directly talk about those skills, reading, writing, listening, speaking. It does, but it doesn't categorize them in exactly that way. It categorizes language in a very interesting way, I think. And it talks about modes of communication. And there are 4 modes of communication. The first is reception, when you receive language. So that is when you read or listen or watch, you have language coming at you, and you need to obviously process that and make meaning. That's the important thing. So that's the first mode of communication. Secondly, we have language production. So that is when you are creating the language yourself. Usually that's in the format of speaking or in writing, or for sign languages, it can be in signing. And then the next stage up, the next mode of communication is interaction. That takes language a little bit further because you are combining reception and production. It's going both ways, and you obviously have to rely on your cognitive abilities to process the language that you receive in order then to produce language. So you are speaking and writing, but in response to something. So maybe you are reading something, and you give your opinion about what you've read. Or maybe you are watching the television and then, I don't know, you are writing a text message about your opinions on that program. There are lots of different examples. Finally, the fourth mode of communication is mediation. Maybe you haven't heard about this before, it's okay. There are lots of different forms of mediation, but to try and explain it simply, it's where you hear or you read some information and you keep that same content, but you adapt the format to suit the new target audience. So, for example, I read a very long book, and then I tell you about the book. I'm not going to use exactly every word that's in this book, but I am going to keep the content more or less the same, but I'm going to summarize that information. I've read it, but now I am speaking it, so there's a change in the skill that I'm using as well. Unlike interaction, where you are creating new content in response to something, mediation is usually about keeping the same content, but changing it slightly to suit the new target audience. So, like I said, that might be summarizing, that might be conveying information in a different way, that might be changing the register, changing the language even. Just to give you an example of a task that involves mediation, here, this is actually a task from our test that's called LinguaSkill. It's in the speaking part of this test, but what the candidate has to do is to read these text messages from their friend Sammy, who is looking to volunteer on a farm, and then the candidate has to look at this information here about a farm stay on a farm in Scotland. There's pictures, there's infographics, there's charts and graphs, there's text. So they need to read this information, they need to cognitively process, and they need to summarize that information and give their opinion on it as well, make a recommendation. So we have lots going on in this task. It involves integrated skills, it involves interaction, and it involves mediation, so taking the same content but changing it to suit the audience. So that's how the CFR talks about language activities and strategies, and that's what I consider would be the core elements of all CFR scales. And remember, there are lots of CFR scales. The CFR also has other scales in it, apart from reception, production, interaction, and mediation. It has scales about linguistic competencies, so vocabulary and grammar and phonology. Those aren't so detailed because they vary quite considerably between languages, don't they? If you think about the way that Spanish does grammar, it's quite different to the way English does grammar, and different other languages are even more diverse. But there are some scales about those linguistic competencies, there are scales about socio-linguistic competencies, and about pragmatic competencies, so things such as turn-taking, being coherent, being fluent. There are also descriptors about using sign language, descriptors for plurilingualism, pluriculturalism, lots of other things that I just haven't got time to go into today. But let's just focus on the core linguistic activities and strategies that a user needs to know in order to actually communicate in English. And so my task for you, my challenge for you is to have a look at the CFR scales and to decide which of those scales are useful and relevant for your learners, because many of them or some of them might not be so important and useful. So have a look and decide which ones are useful.
Okay, so it is time for a break now. So we are going to pause It is time for a break, right? I'm right. Good. So we're going to pause now, but then when we come back with coffee and more energy and we are all fresh and rested, we're going to look at some actual descriptors and we're going to talk about the range of those, and then we're going to move into the second half of our work today, where we are going to start looking at how to apply those descriptors to looking at texts, designing tasks, and then beginning to scratch the surface of those two things, plus assessing performance. How do we know when somebody is meeting a certain level or not? Okay, so let's rest, coffee, and come back.
Okay, a couple of housekeeping. We're going live with this session, so when you speak from the audience, please use the mic so that people in
Know
the
what you're saying.
YouTube channel. Do you want to, shall we sing happy birthday to him? Yeah? Okay, so.
Que los cumplas feliz, que los cumplas feliz, que los cumplas, que los cumplas feliz.
Gracias, Adri. Si me das elegir.
So, a couple of comments. You've seen in the presentation that there is a document most of you must be aware of, aligning, bringing together the CEFR and the curriculum designs for the city of Buenos Aires, right? Problem is that that document was produced back in 2021, I think. So it was developed upon the old curriculum. If you've had a chance to read the new curriculum design for primary school, you must have noticed that we've already incorporated all of the notions that come in the new version of the Common European Framework of Reference, mediation, interaction, etc., right? Some of you have asked whether these slides will be available, and yes, they will. We will give you a QR code where you can collect and download all the practical resources that Graham and Pablo will be sharing with us today. And so that's it, okay?
Thank you. And so, by the way, none of the documents that I am sharing today are limited access in any way. If you look for if you want to dig deep into the Common European Framework, just Google Council of Europe, CEFR. They have, all of the documents are there, and there is a lot of information. We will be sharing a QR code with a folder where you have some of the key documents already there, but everything you will see is either Council of Europe readily available or Ciudad de Buenos Aires, you already know it. So and actually, here are the two main documents you want. Number one is the 2021 document with the old curriculum, but the other one is this, the companion volume. So if you want to know like your ABC of what you need, you would like to have a look at the 2001 original Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Teaching, Learning and Assessment. The companion volume 2020, which is the one there on the right, is your best friend and your worst enemy, because it is about 280 pages full of table after table after table. Read the introduction, the rest is for reference. Okay? So, let's look at the kind of thing and what this means in Buenos Aires in the old curriculum is this, which is, this is how in the document you see the alignment between the Common European Framework of Reference levels and the recorridos for primaria secundaria. Now, let's play a game now, and I'm going to show you so we're going to begin with global competencies. I'm going to show you a couple of descriptors, and we're going to be working on levels A1, A2, B1, which are where most learners that we work with usually are. So I'm going to show you descriptors and then try to figure out which is which. So this is for vocabulary range. Here is one. Graham was talking about how in the descriptor tables you have a bar. So instead of having the bar, I just put a plus with the ones that show like something plus. It's like the upper range of that band. So here is one. Here is another. So has sufficient vocabulary for the expression of basic communicative needs, sufficient vocabulary for coping with simple survival needs, has a basic vocabulary repertoire of words, signs, and phrases related to particular concrete situations. By the way, the words or signs, we don't mention that because it's not relevant. Well, it is relevant, but it is not like the core application. But the Common European Framework has specific descriptors for signing. So whenever we say words, also there is a reference for signs. Because we're working with English, I'm sticking to the language bits, sort of the spoken language bits, not the signing bits. But that is there, and this is why you have the slash signs here. And then a good range of vocabulary related to familiar topics, everyday situations, sufficient vocabulary to express themselves, blah, blah, blah. Well, I hope you can read. I tried to make it as big a letter as I could. For those of us wearing glasses, I know I'm not making your life any easier right now. So, which would you say is the first one, would you say is it the B2, the B1, the A2, or the A1? A2, the second one? And the last one has to be B1. Yes. Yes. And yes. So, you can see that we are progressing from basic vocabulary to sufficient to good range. This is where you can see all of the fill in the gaps that you have to do with the framework. What is basic? What is sufficient? What is good range? The framework is not going to tell you that. You have to fill in the blanks. And that is a pretty big blank you have to fill in. See what I mean? Another thing is, one of the dimensions in which the levels progress is from the personal to the general, then from the very concrete to the very abstract and specific domain. And so we are adding range. We are going from basic to sufficient to good. So we are expanding the range of the vocabulary, but we are also expanding from particular concrete situations to familiar situations to the everyday life. So you see how we are becoming wider, in a sense, more general. These are the usual dimensions where we see the framework progressing. So from the concrete to the abstract, from the not many tools to the more tools, but also from my own life to more social, and from very concrete to very specific. So these are like some of the usual dimensions in which you see the descriptors progressing. Sociolinguistic appropriateness. I'm beginning with the ones that are more unexpected, because you would expect me to have something here like written production. But appropriateness is a great one because it shows you the sociolinguistic dimension, that this is not just about production of specific vocabulary or grammar. So 1, 2, 3. Usually the longer ones are more advanced, but not always. So don't be fooled into judging by number of lines. So I'm giving you a minute to read, getting out of the way. Okay. Which would you say is the first one? A1? B1? Second one in the middle? A1, and the other one has to be A2. Sorry, A1, sorry. So, yes, this is B1. Perform and respond to a wide range of language functions. You see the wide range there. A2 can handle very short social exchanges. A1, basic social contact. So, again, you see the dimensions. From basic social contact using the simplest everyday polite forms to short social exchanges, everyday polite forms, make and respond invitations, suggestions, apologies. This is where you see the fill in the blanks, because can make and respond to invitations, suggestions, apologies. If you are preparing your curriculum, if you're preparing the things you will be teaching and assessing, this is giving you a list of things that you can say, okay, I have to teach these items. I have to teach these blocks. But that's for you to decide. To perform and respond to a wide range of language functions using their most common exponents in a neutral register. If we moved into the more advanced levels, B2, C1, C2, we would be looking at increasingly more accuracy and less tolerance, let's say. Understanding conversation between two people, a very useful one. Talking about interaction now, oral interaction. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Have a read, have a guess. Okay, so which of these three would you say is the most basic, the A1? The first one. The second one. Can understand some expressions when people are discussing them, family, school, hobbies, or surroundings, provided the delivery is slow and clear. Look at all of the accommodations. The delivery slow and clear, some things. What about the A2? Top or bottom? Top? Top, bottom? How many people top? Hands up. How many people bottom? Less. I think you're more on your own here. Let's see. So, 1, 2, 3. So, we go from some expressions when people are discussing them, and words or signs and short sentences in a simple conversation, provided people communicate very slowly and very clearly. That would be the bottom level, the A1. A2 can follow in outline short, simple exchanges, conducted very slowly and clearly. We've got that here too. And then if you want the plus level, the A2 plus, that would be, or the upper range of A2. Can generally identify the topic of discussion when it is conducted slowly and clearly, can recognize when people agree and disagree in a conversation conducted slowly and clearly. Moves into, can generally follow the main points of extended discussion. Look at, we have a longer conversation, and then slowly and clearly becomes clearly articulated in standard language or a familiar variety. So it's less of an effort. And in the interaction, descriptors, another dimension applies to what I call, this is my personal term, what I call friction of communication. There, you see references to how much effort the interlocutors are making to hold the conversation. So sometimes you'll see in the upper range, in the B2s and C1, for instance, a distinction is, in B2, it's the idea that the interaction happens without making great efforts. And in C1, it becomes zero effort, very efficient. And C2 is extremely efficient, an excellent communicator. So this idea of how much effort is being made in the interaction descriptors is another dimension that you see, that figures, that shows pretty prominently. So, overall reading comprehension, we're going for the big ones now, sort of like we're getting more global. This first one can understand very short, simple text, can read with a large degree of independence, adapting style and speed of reading to different texts and purposes, can read straightforward, factual texts. Which would you say is the first one? That would be the A1? Yes, it is. So, very short, simple texts, a single phrase at a time. So, this is useful to set our expectations. The idea of this is it describes a sort of, or a certain level of performance at understanding texts. So we recognize it when we see it. Usually issues with alignment are, we are sometimes quite harsh on some things, like we expect more than what is here. With certain things, we underestimate them, so we actually look at them and say, oh no, this is a much higher level than what you actually find here. This is useful as a reference because it shows things sort of pulling together. Then here, sorry. sorry, my bad. So here that would be B2. That would be way more advanced than A1. This is actually the level of, This is what we would have called upper intermediate. This is the level for those of you who are familiar with exams. This is the level of first, the old FCE, the Cambridge B2 First. This is a B2 exam. So when I started studying English, this was the level that was considered like the top of the line. Like you get there, you've made it. I joined the Joaquin and then I found out that there was life beyond that. But so, and I have friends here in the room who are witness to that. We walked that path together. Some of them helped me walk the path. I'm talking about you, Adri. So, and then this is B1 in the middle. But then, again, this is useful as a sign of, I find it useful to think of these dimensions in which the framework progresses. So looking at very short, simple texts to straightforward factual texts to different texts and purposes using appropriate references. So you can see how there is a progress to larger texts, more elaborate, more articulated, more complex. And then expanding on the range of purposes, the range of in the registers, the genres, etc., etc., etc. So far, so good? One more. I promise this is the last one. Written production. Let's talk about writing, because the previous one was about reception. So A1, A2, or B1. So we are looking now at a narrower range. So the first one, series of simple phrases, sentences linked with simple connectors. Is that A1, A2, B1? A1? No, sorry. The one in the middle. Can give information about matters of personal relevance. Simple isolated phrases and sentences is the A1. And this is A2. Now, so I told you, don't think about longer is more advanced. I told you about that. I warned you. Now, what is the key here? If you look at the A1, we're talking about simple isolated phrases. Simple isolated phrases. We are not talking about connected discourse. The idea of a series of phrases linked with simple connectors is what begins shaping the text. So a dimension in which the written production descriptors progress is this articulation of speech, which is also an excellent example of how the framework is not a framework of grammar and vocabulary. We tend to focus on that because we are language teachers. So for us, it is very simple to obsess with that, because that is something we can actually fix very simply. It's simpler than fixing the other stuff. But actually, most of the framework is about producing articulated discourse, being a sophisticated receiver of language, and being an effective producer and mediator. So there are many references to the organization of discourse, both spoken and written. There are many references to the clarity of the ideas, to the impact that we read, to the impact that we create. We see lots of making a good impression on the reader or the listener. So all of these things are not captured by, oh, you are using huge instead of very big, so you are more advanced. Yes, that is a part of it, but that's not all there is to it. Does this make sense? Okay, and then this is B1, the more advanced one. Straightforward connect. So here we already see references to straightforward connected texts. And then we see a range of familiar subjects. So if we moved into the B2, C1, C2, it would not be a range of familiar subjects, it would be a wider range of subjects. And if we move into the truly advanced, the proficient C1, C2s, it becomes any subject. So, now let's talk about how to identify the level of a task. And for that, I'm going to go back to my friend Graham.
Hello again, welcome back for the third video, and this is about how do you know which CFR level a task is. So, for example, a teacher may say, hey, I found a really great text for my students to read. I've taken it from, I don't know, a magazine or a book or a blog or the internet, and it's just perfect for them because it's what they're interested in. But is it appropriate for their level? Or conversely, a teacher might say, I really need to create a writing task for my students. They need to practice their writing, or I need to even test them on their writing, but I need a task that's suitable for my students and obviously suitable for their level. So how can we use the CFR to help us, and how can we make sure that the tasks that we either have or that we create are aligned to the CFR's approach and their levels? So our videos now, the last two videos, are about creating and mapping tasks or curricula or assessments or things to the CFR. Helpfully, there's a new handbook that came out a few years ago now, three years ago, I think, called Aligning Language Education with the CFR, a handbook. And it's really, really useful. What I'm going to do now is to try and summarize the useful parts for you, the basics, as it were, of how to map tasks or create tasks to the CFR. So thinking about two different scenarios. Firstly, to what extent do existing tasks or curricula or assessments or whatever relate to the CFR's approach, and which levels in the CFR? Secondly, if you are looking to create a new task or a new curriculum or a new assessment, and you want to make sure it relates to the CFR's approach and to which levels as well. Now, this document, Aligning Language Education with the CFR, a handbook, talks about 5 different stages in how you do this. But don't worry, only the first 3 are particularly relevant for our scenarios. And I'll take you through in brief those first 3 about familiarization, specification, and standardization. Standard setting, the 4th box in the light blue there, is a more in-depth process that we do for high-stakes tests, such as Cambridge tests, to make sure that they really, really are aligned to the CFR. And validation is an ongoing quality check to make sure that our tests or our learning materials are indeed at the right level. But for your purposes here today and in your immediate future, we are going to have a look at these first 3, familiarization and specification, and then in the next video we'll have a look at standardization. So familiarization is basically what I was talking you through in the previous 2 videos. It's making sure that you are familiarized with the CFR, you know about it to an appropriate level. You don't need to know every nut and bolt, but you need to know about the CFR generally. And then more importantly, you need to know about the CFR scales and descriptors that are relevant for you and your learners, those ones that you are particularly interested in. So, which is why I challenged you at the end of the second video to become familiarized with those scales and descriptors that are useful for you. So we're going to take as some examples in this video 2 scales from the CFR. The first one, reading correspondence. So that's when your learners read an email or a letter or a text message or something. So that's a skill involved in reading. And then a skill to do with writing. correspondence. So when they are writing a letter or an email or a text message, so that is written interaction actually. So I guess the question is, let's assume for the moment that these are two scales that are relevant for you when you are teaching. They are very useful for your learners. They're skills that you think your learners will need to use in their real life. They have real life application, and therefore you think it's valuable to teach these skills, which is great. So you need to become familiarized with what these scales say, with the descriptors in those scales, and particularly at the levels of your learners. Now, as I understand it, probably most of your learners are at the A1, A2, B1 level. And so it's right that you focus in on those levels. So let's have a look at reading correspondence, for example. Let's assume that you think this is a really useful scale for you, and particularly at those lower levels. How can we make sure that you are really familiarized with those descriptors? Now, of course, you can just read them, but you're a teacher, you know the best ways in trying to become familiar with something is you need to play some games or do something to help you really remember those things. You don't need to remember it off by heart, but you just need to have that internalized within you. So I'm going to play a very, very, very quick game here with you. Here are 3 descriptors from the reading correspondence scale. Can you put them in order? Which descriptor relates to which CFR level? Have a think about that. Which one is the hardest, or the one for the more proficient learners? Which one's the easiest? And I'll give you the answer. It goes like that. Yeah, okay. So that's just a little way of helping you become familiarized with those CFR descriptors that are useful for you. So we see at the A1 level, in reading correspondence, can understand short, simple messages sent via social media or email, and then the other 2 are higher. That middle one is A2 plus. Remember that plus level that I was talking to you about. So it's sort of a high A2 level. Okay, and then we move on to specifications. So once you've become familiarized with the CFR scales that you're particularly interested in, you then need to think about for example, the reading text that you have and which CFR level they are at. So, for example, we're going to take this. This is obviously a text message or an email maybe that somebody has sent to somebody else. Jake has sent to Andy, and it's in an activity that you give to your students. You want to know if this reading text is appropriate for your students. You want to know which CFR level this text is at. So you need to read the CFR descriptors, or you can read the descriptors in the guidelines from the Buenos Aires Ministry of Education, and then decide which is the best match, which is the best fitting descriptor that matches to the reading text that you have. And you're looking at the CFR level that you think a learner will be able to do it. It's that is accessible for them. And this one, I'm going to give you the answer, I think is A1. I think this is the best match for this text. So A1 says, can understand short, simple messages on postcards. Okay, it's not a postcard, but let's go to the next one. Can understand short, simple messages sent via social media or email, e.g. proposing what to do, when and where to meet. I think this is a really good example of this text being A1 level. Now, when you want to create something that a learner can learn from, a piece of material, or you want to create a test, then you will need to do that process in reverse. And it's essentially what we do in Cambridge when we are creating a test. We take the CFR descriptor, and then we will create a task that make sense to that descriptor. This is an example from the B2 for speaking, and we've used the CFR descriptor, a B2 descriptor that says can take an active part in informal discussion in familiar contexts, and we've created this task, and we believe that this task maps onto this descriptor, so is aligned with that descriptor, sort of fits that descriptor. And if you're creating tasks for use in the classroom, you might do the same. So, for example, again, I'm going to assume that you think the correspondence scale is very useful for you, and you think your learners are at the A2 level, but you want to check that. And so you have a look at the descriptors in the correspondence scale at A2 level. There they are. So this is probably the sorts of things that A2 students should be able to do in correspondence. So, for example, can convey personal information of a routine nature, for example, in a short email or letter introducing themselves. So you would expect an A2 level learner to be able to do that. So you want to choose the descriptor or the descriptors that you want to focus on. So maybe there are other descriptors that you want to put together into one task. Maybe you've got this descriptor which is reading, but you also want to bear in mind another one about grammar, for example. So choose those descriptors. Then very, very important, as I said before, it's okay to adapt the descriptors to suit your context. So localize it or personalize it even to your class or to your setting, your context, whatever that might be. It's okay to change the wording. It's okay to tweak it and adapt it as long as it sort of has the same feeling. Then break that descriptor down a little if you can. What do you actually want the students to do? So here it says can convey personal information in a short email. Okay, but I want them to write an email to their friend. So you're making it a little more specific in the context that you are, maybe breaking it down into slightly different stages as to how they will achieve it. Think about the success criteria. This is really important, and we'll pick up on it in the final video. So the success criteria means how will the teacher and how also will the students know if they, the students, have achieved the task successfully. So you might want to spend a bit of time working that out. And then create your task, whatever that might be. If it's simple, then great. If it's a bit more complex to create, then it's quite nice to get some other teachers to look at the task, see if they agree that they think it's a good task for your students. Hopefully they might know your students a little bit and their input can be really valuable. Ideally, if possible, trial your task out with a few students. I know that's not always possible, but if you can trial your task out first, then it really gives you valuable information as to whether that task is actually going to work and to give you the information that you need. As I finish this video, just a few additional useful tools that you might like to use. Englishprofile.org, that's really useful in checking the CFR level of English vocabulary and grammar. And you can go there, you can actually select between British English or American English, and you can select a word and it'll tell you which CFR level that comes at. We don't have time to go through that now, but do have a play around with that. That can be a super useful tool. So there's one for vocabulary, there's also one for grammar. That's available at the same place, englishprofile.org, and that's free to use. Another tool I'd like to recommend is textinspector.com. So if you've got a reading task, or indeed a listening text as well, or indeed a writing text that a student has written, you can copy and paste it into Text Inspector and it will give you lots of metrics about it. It's free to a certain extent. You might want to consider paying for a subscription to it, or your institution to pay for a subscription. If you get that, then it will tell you the CFR level as well as lots of other metrics. So do have a look at that. That may be really useful for you. Okay, your turn now. I've been talking long enough, I'm sorry. So you're going to get a reading text which you need to align or map to the CFR. Think about which descriptors and which levels, and also to create a CFR-aligned writing task. Okay, hope it goes well, and see you in a bit.
Okay, something I forgot to ask in the previous two videos. Any questions about any of that? Because I've been assuming that, yeah, Graham is really good at what he does, so it's perfectly transparent to everybody. But questions that come to mind, comments, feedback? Nope? Okay, so we're going to continue working within the correspondence, because he gave examples with reading correspondence and writing correspondence. So let's do one more activity on how we would apply the descriptors to recognize or to more or less tag this to a level. By the way, in case we haven't been clear enough about that, this is an exercise in interpretation and use of judgment. This is not a scientific 1 + 2 + 3 makes 6 thing. So there may be discrepancies, which is why Graham is going to mention this in the next video, but he doesn't go into the standardization bits. But if you're thinking of high stakes uses of language, for instance, if you are designing not a test for your class, because in the text for your class, it's usually you, your curriculum, and what happened in the classroom, and the things that are relevant for that particular level. So you know more or less what should go in there. But if you're thinking of an exam that is going to determine things for others, that is going to be used more widely, and more high stakes use, then a typical standardization exercise always includes a panel, among many, many other things, but always includes a number of people looking at the text and saying, I think this is too high, I think this is the right level, I think this is lower than this. So there are a number of methods and techniques that are used, but it is not something that I sit down and do. Or even with tools like Graham was mentioning, the grammar profile, the vocabulary profile, which are completely free to access, just Google them. Or even things like the text inspector. It uses 200 metrics, yes. So, but it is looking at things like range and how often do these words or do these kinds of things appear in texts that are at this or that level. But at the end of the day, this is a judgment call. This is something that you have to decide for that particular context in that particular case. And there may be reasons why you think something is here and somebody else thinks that same thing is there. And there may be different contexts, and there are lots and lots of variables. So for certain uses, you have to make more clear-cut distinctions. Imagine that classic example without going into things like super high stakes, international exams, admission, blah, blah. Think that you want to set your admission exam for a profesorado, for profesorado English. So you want to make sure you have 5,000 people want to apply, because who wouldn't want to be a language teacher? And you only have 200 places to allot. So you want to make sure that they go to the top people within the group, the people who are going to be able to make the most of that. Now, in that case, you want to design a test that helps you set a clear-cut line, like these people are above the line, these people are below the line. For something like that, you are going to have to set down the law. You're going to have to say, okay, this is what we expect to see. This is what we don't accept. This is what we consider good enough. This is what we don't. And then you do something that we technically in assessment called operationalize the construct, which is a very lofty way of saying you're going to have to transform all of this beauty thing about good range, high this, can do that. You have to turn it into things you can observe in activities, in tasks. So you can produce this, you can use that, you can recognize this to a certain level. You have to translate all of these high, vague, beautiful language into concrete 1, 2, 3 right and wrong things. Because you're going to have to make decisions on design activities. But that is not the framework. That is one way of using the framework. See where I'm going with this? So when you use it, especially when you're thinking of designing tasks or deciding which text goes where, then you have to start making decisions about this feels more like this feels more like that. And that is the capital sin, or that is the way in which we pay for our sins, because you can have a great model, but the good models are not very useful. And the more useful models are usually not very good. A good framework is like this. It's very vague and covers all kinds of things and includes 5 million angles into one thing. But then it becomes very difficult to use. A model that is very simple to use would be grammar, vocabulary. If the word is on the list, then you are level 6. The problem with that model is that it's very easy to use, but it's not very good. So striking the balance and using good models in defensible ways is where we live. And that is the fault of, I guess, Adam and Eve, and we lost paradise, so everything is screwed up after that. We live in an imperfect world. But anyway, going back to correspondence, I have included here a simplified text. This is a text I took from a course book. Okay, so I know which level this is. It is one of these two levels, A2 or B1, and it is an example of correspondence, because this is a letter that was received for an advice column in a magazine, or an online, or some kind of blog or site. Okay, so for reference, here are the descriptors, in case you haven't memorized them when Graham showed them on screen for about 10 seconds. And I'll give you a bit of time to have a look at the text, have a look at the descriptors, and see where you think it fits. This could be A2, this could be B1. I am narrowing it down for you. Okay, I'll give you a bit of time to go through it, have a look at the descriptors, have a look at the text. The basic question you are asking yourself is, which of these things seems to describe what is happening in the text best? Okay, are we ready to have a show of hands? Or do you need a bit more time? A bit more time? Okay. This is where you begin to see that it's not as easy as it looks. Okay, so hands up, how many people think this is A2? For those of you who are watching online, just very few hands. Hands up, and by the way, you cannot opt out of this one. If you don't raise your hand, you cannot do that, okay? You have to commit. Life is about making choices. So, you make your choices, you live with them, and we call it life. So, B1, lots of hands. All right. So, who would like to say Which bit of the B1 descriptor you think matches the text and why? There at the back.
So number 2 from B1, can understand straightforward personal letters, emails, postings, giving a relatively detailed account of events and experiences.
Okay, so here you said that the key word there is?
Probably detailed. And above, you have feelings and wishes in personal letters, B1.
So in the text, we see, well, what is a detailed description versus a non-detailed is where your judgment comes in. But if we compare this to other texts, then we might be able to say, okay, this is more detailed than that. But this feels pretty detailed in terms of the number of things going on here. Maybe the adjectives, so maybe the adjectives are detailed. The adjectives are giving us another level of information. And also the references to the feelings and wishes, and this is very much about that.
She has a doubt to say, what can I do? And she sets a conditional sentence.
So we want to, and then we can use other descriptors. I have not included them here, but if we were doing this sort of outside of this context, and you had access to all of the possible descriptors, you would start, what you would usually do is what Graham suggested. You pick up 2, 3, 4 different scales that are relevant. So you might be looking at grammar, you might be looking at vocabulary, or in the context of a particular case, you might be looking at, in our A2 courses in my school, we teach this. In our B1 courses at this school, we include this other structure, like we include conditional sentences. So this is something that we would find in our B1 courses, which means that this would be more appropriate for a B1 versus an A2. So the more information you bring in and the more context you have, the better the decision you can take. This is where you see the adapting versus adopting. Because you cannot take the CEFR and use it like a machine that processes text and spits out B1 plus or something like that. Does this make sense? Now, for reference, if we were going into B2, these are the descriptors for reading correspondence B2. Let's look at how they sort of get more advanced. Can read correspondence. So, by the way, the other thing about the framework is that we usually think of it in terms of one on top of the other. A better representation is circles. One circle inside the other. So a B2 user can do everything a B1 user can do, plus. The descriptors for B2 are plus, on top of. And then a B2 user can do everything an A1, A2, B1 user can do, plus this. Make sense? So, a B2 user can do all this, plus can read correspondence relating to their field of interest and readily grasp the essential meaning. So the field of interest, B2, is very much about beginning to specialize, beginning to focus on like one area that is your interest, and then in that field, you can do much more. And then can understand what is said in a personal email or posting, even where some colloquial language is used. So here, although this is a reading descriptor, we see the language expanding. So another area where language develops is the range of language. We tend to think more in terms of how formal language progresses. So we tend to think more in terms of, well, when you get more advanced, you know more unusual language, more specialized language, more academic language, more formal language. But another sign of advanced language is understanding different varieties of language and managing colloquial language, which is actually much trickier because it is full of gaps, because it is full of, I say this, I mean that. It is full of all kinds of trickier things. Actually, one sign of people who are advanced, who are more advanced but not quite, is that they sound too formal. Because actually being formal is easy. Being just the right level of informal is the catch. So if we wanted to make to include a more elaborate letter, or if we wanted to include, if we were doing this as a kind of reading comprehension test for levels, we would be showing this letter and ask questions, and if you can show you understand this, you might be at a B1. And then for a B2, we have a choice. Maybe we could include something that is much more technical about an area that you know about. So if we are doing this for a university where they are studying law, we would make this a more legal text. Or you could make this more informal. If you're thinking of a school, you might include something that is much more casual, or that shows like lots of Americanisms or Australianisms or something-isms. Make sense? Okay, and now, time for you to get your hands dirty. So, I'm going to split the room. We have a beautiful corridor in the middle, so the split is natural. This side of a room, you're going to work with B1. This side of a room, you're going to work with A2. I'm going to give you a few minutes, and what you have to do this time is design a task. So, think of a task, a writing prompt, a writing activity you can give your learners that would exploit the levels that you are working with, depending on the side of the room where you are. Is this clear? If you would like to make it a simple writing prompt, like you are writing a letter to your friend about this, that's great. If you want to think about, well, I'm going to something more mediation, I'm going to give you a text, or I'm going to make you listen to something and then you're going to have to write a letter, it's your choice. But basically, your goal is to choose one of the descriptors, a couple of the descriptors, as much as you can, and make an exercise that really make an activity that really taps into that. Okay? Go ahead. By the way, not on your own, just if you want to do it in pairs with 3, 4 people, the people sitting around you, it's your choice. Go ahead. ¿Todo bien? Ready? Ready, everybody? All right, so, number one, a public service announcement. There has just been an announcement that there was a training for Secundaria Aprende tomorrow morning at Unicaba, or organized by Unicaba. Morning and afternoon, it has just been suspended.
We'll probably have an online meeting, okay? Because then it will be very difficult to find another date before classes begin. So we haven't scheduled the meetings yet, but you will be. Just now you got confirmation that the face-to-face meeting has been canceled, all right?
So,
that's correct.
The official
face-to-face.
So the official thing is you don't have to go anywhere tomorrow, but don't make any other plans. That's basically the message. Don't make any plans, so you don't have to go there, but you cannot be doing something else. But the training is not called off, the training is just reorganized, and you're going to have to do it one way or another. Okay, cool. So, having said that, let's begin with, then, some A2 tasks. Now, Sabrina's going to help me, passing around the mic. Who would like to share the task that they have designed for A2 written correspondence? If you don't pick, I'm going to start pointing.
Okay.
Over here.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, we were thinking about an advertisement, reply to an advertisement for a Big Brother show, if you want to join the Big Brother show. And the task would be reply to the ad and ask for further information, at least 4 questions. And remember to use formal tone. We added just so we were thinking about the A2 descriptor that relates to advertisement in writing, asking for further information and items that interest them, and composing basic formal emails or letters.
Excellent. So you have chosen one descriptor, you're giving, so this is going to be an interaction. So the reading, well, it says responding to the ad, so you have to include the ad in the prompt. Excellent. So very well picked, sort of you focus on the descriptor. And then another thing that is interesting and that you mentioned specific success criteria. So you have to include 4 questions at least, and then something about the tone. If you want to bring it any further, this is part of a reason too why sometimes we suggest, well, sometimes. In Cambridge we have a reputation for always doing it, but we don't have time to go into that right now. The word limits, sort of, which is basically an idea of the range of language. But the more detail you can include, the better. And the more you can specify the success criteria, the better for you when you're grading, for your fairness, because people know what to do, what to expect, how to succeed. And also you're making it more relevant. In context, you might even include things which are not part of the framework as such, but things like use this vocabulary or use this particular thing that we have been practicing, because in your particular context, that is part of being successful in the task. Excellent. Someone else, A2? Great work. Over there.
Okay, I wrote to send an email to make a restaurant reservation for a special event and with a dietary restriction.
Excellent. And then, so you're giving a purpose, you're giving a context. You may want to, you may or may not, so you're leaving it open-ended, like it can be any day, any event, any dietary restriction. Usually, well, sometimes the choice is to give you, like they did, a kind of input of, like a checklist. We want to go on Tuesday, or I give you an email where somebody says, oh, let's celebrate Pablo's birthday on Wednesday, and remember that our brother is gluten-free. So something like that, because then you're giving specific, sort of like, okay, you have to do that. But the flip side of that is that when you integrate skills, assessment-wise, you are integrating another layer of complication, which is you are assessing an interaction, but you're also assessing reading comprehension. If I say gluten-free, my brother is gluten-free, and then you ask for a vegan menu, is that part of your written correspondence skills, or is that part of your reading comprehension skills? So when I am grading, should I be considering it a success because you successfully communicated that you wanted one restriction? Or should I say, oh no, but that was not the correct restriction? In assessment terms, we call that validity. Are you assessing what you should be assessing? So if you are writing something, if you are designing a task that is going to be, in this case, specifically about writing, adding an element of success in the task that is related to your reading is actually incorporating sort of you can fail for the wrong reasons, or you can be successful for the wrong reasons. And we call that in assessment, it's a boring term, it's task irrelevant variance. Construct irrelevant variation, where you're basically being successful or not because of something that is not specifically what you're trying to assess. And this is something you want to be careful with. In the context of classroom assessment, not a problem. In the context of the work that you're doing in the classroom, actually you're teaching everything and everything is combined. If you're thinking of exams that are more high stakes, like if this was the end of the year exam, or if this was the admission exam for profesorado or something like that, then you want to be careful about, are you assessing strictly what you say you are assessing, or are you assessing something else? Does this make sense? Now, okay, let's hear about this side of the room. Any B1s over there?
Hello. I made a flyer about a camp, so they had to make a recommendation letter introducing themselves and 3 or 4 reasons why they should be selected, the person who is reading the article, the mail. I wrote 2 paragraphs. The thing has to be 2 paragraphs long, and I wrote 80 and 100 words, but I think it's too long for everyone. I'm not sure about that.
Okay, since you mentioned it, the thing about the length is, of course, if you've got an elementary learner, if you've got an A1, A2, you would not expect that learner to produce 200 words. Yes. Why? Because 200 words is going to include a lot of organization in the text. And you don't expect a learner at that level to be able to manage that, to communicate that much information. And you don't expect them to have the linguistic tools to organize that information in a coherent way. They are at the level where they can say, my name is Pablo, I am 51 today, I live in Buenos Aires, I am a teacher, I have 2 children. You don't expect them to be at the level where they can write 5 paragraphs about something. And then this, but that, instead of blah, blah, blah. However, in conclusion, you don't expect them to be able to organize something that big. So, having said that, there is no word limit, top or bottom. It depends on the kind of text. When you give numbers like that, or when we give numbers like that in our exams, for instance, we give them as a sign of, this is roughly a window in which most people should be able to do the task. If you are writing less, you probably didn't say anything you needed to say. If you are writing more, you are probably adding things that are not there. But it's not that if you write 81 words, that's a problem. The problem is if you write 120 words, you probably gave me a lot of information that I didn't ask for. And that is off topic, and that is a problem. So the word limit, don't obsess too much about it. Make it reasonable. But it is useful to give a range so that learners don't feel like they have to keep writing and writing and writing, because that is basically an invitation to make unnecessary errors.
Maybe the range would be in the 2 paragraphs. In the first paragraph is introduce yourself, and the second one, how many words it takes to you to give 3 or 4 reasons, not so specific.
Yep, careful with that, because if you are giving away that you're going to write 2 paragraphs, you are already giving them the basic organization of the text, which may be one of the things you're testing in the task. One of the things you want them to do is to decide what information goes and how they set it up. So, don't be stingy when you give information, but don't be too generous, unless you want to focus on something concrete. Sometimes you are writing a task and you are interested in include this language or use this particular way of doing it, so you want to restrict the choices. But if you're just assessing the whole thing, then you want to leave it open-ended. No right or wrong answer, everything is context specific. See where I'm going? This is not going to tell you how to do it. This is actually going to make it a little bit more difficult, but it's forcing you to do it better. Thank you very much. Another activity for our B1s. One more. It's your choice, or Sabrina is going to throw the mic at you.
So in order to avoid the throwing of the microphone, well, we have thought of providing our students with a short job advertisement. We were thinking of an A2 so that we don't have the problem of the reading comprehension.
But your task was B1.
Yeah, but they have to write a letter of application for that particular job advertisement.
All right.
And we were planning on telling them that they would have to include in the letter personal information about their qualifications and experience, and why they need to be, why they think these people have to employ them.
All right. So which descriptors are you thinking about specifically?
Compose a basic letter of application within or with limited supporting details.
Okay, excellent. So you focus on one and then you tag things on. Good. Another thing that doesn't make it particularly useful is, so excellent examples, and this is basically how you would go about it. Again, in the real world, or if you would be looking, sometimes you would be looking at what you have done in class that you're trying to assess, or what you have in your syllabus. Other times you will be looking at the level above and the level below. Other times you will be looking at more descriptors and trying to incorporate as much as possible, because the other catch of working with the CFR is, because there are so many scales, because there are so many descriptors and so many things, putting everything into one test or one course is going to make it impossibly long. So what you want to do is things that compress and bring together all of the dimensions. And also, when you are looking at a written production activity, you are not just looking at the descriptors that you see here. You are looking at the organization, you are looking at the language, you are looking at the register, you are looking at all of the other things happening. So you want to look at all of these things in parallel. Questions? Comments? Nope? Moving on then. For our next and final part, we're going to be working on how do you know which level a student is. Hello, Moto. Hello to you. So, how do you know which level a student is? And once again, for the last time today, we're going to be listening to Graham.
Great. Hello. Welcome to the final video for today. Well done. Thank you very much for your dedication. We're nearly there. Well done. Just 10 or 15 minutes to go from me, and then a little bit more from Pablo afterwards. So in our final video, we are looking at the same sort of question, but thinking about a student, a learner. How do you know which CFR level a student is at? Often, because I'm sure you're familiar with this, we get students who think, I'm really good at English. Even I know a little bit about the CFR, I think I'm C2. Or conversely, you might get students who think, oh no, I'm rubbish at English. Either way, we want to find out what level they are actually at. Or you may hear other teachers saying, oh, this student's really good, whereas actually you think, really? Are you sure? So we want to get a good idea of what level a student is at. Obviously, I'm from Cambridge. You can take Cambridge exams to prove that. But I'm thinking about in your classroom context, how do you know for sure which level a student is at? And this is where the third section comes in. Remember the CFR alignment handbook. We're going to have a look at this area called standardization now. And this is a process whereby all teachers have the same understanding, or as similar as possible, of the level of a learner's performance. So let's say our learners all do a writing task, the same writing task. How do we know the level of the learner? We can also apply this process if we want our teachers to have the same understanding of the level of a reading text or a listening text. That's perfectly fine to do that, although you may find that tools such as Text Inspector do a good job with that as well. So we're going to take the writing task that we looked at earlier in my video and think about success criteria. I mentioned that it is really useful to have success criteria. We want to specify what those success criteria are, and we want to make sure that everyone, so all the teachers involved, agree with that. We can, in order to create that success criteria, we may want to use descriptors from lots of different scales in the CFR. We may even want to use AI to help us formulate that description of a success criteria. That's okay as well. Then the next step is to find one or two examples of students writing. We're going to take the example of writing that fits that success criteria exactly. So they are a brilliant example of what it means to be A2 in writing correspondence, for example. A little slang phrase here from British English, bang on. If somebody is bang on, it means they are exactly at a particular level or whatever. So we want to find a student, an example from their writing which is bang on, exactly at A2, for example. And then once we have that performance that everybody agrees is exactly at A2, let's have a look at other students' writing performances and use that, what we call benchmarked piece of writing that the student has done that we agree is exactly at A2. That's the benchmark. How do the other students compare to that? Are they higher or lower? Are they higher or lower but still within A2, or are they higher or lower and actually they're B1 or they are A1, for example? So that's the process that we need to go through to make sure that everybody is standardized. By everybody, I mean all the teachers involved. So we're going to take this task as an example writing task. It's a fairly straightforward task about writing an email to our friend Pat, talking about arrangements to meet up somewhere. It's all they need to do is write 25 words or more than that. So it's A2 level, and we want to firstly define our success criteria for an exact bang-on A2 student. Can we describe this learner? Now, we will use the CFR descriptors or the descriptors that you have in the guidelines from the Ministry of Education in Buenos Aires to create this success criteria. We will look at the descriptors for correspondence, but we'll look at other descriptors as well from different scales to create our success criteria. Primarily, we're going to be looking at these descriptors from the correspondence scale at A2, because that's our target scale and our target level, but we are going to add additional information as well. Here is an example of a paragraph that I've written which talks about the success criteria for a learner who has responded to this task at A2 level. So effectively, I'm using the descriptors from the CFR in the context of this task, in the context of my learners and what I know about them as well. So I'm very much applying the CFR to this context. And I've written these success criteria. And ideally what you would do with the other teachers in your school who are teaching at the same level, you would come together, you'd use the CFR descriptors, and together you would work together to create this success criteria. Just take a few seconds to read it. So we're talking about the learner who is giving simple information covering all 3 bullet points. The reader doesn't need to guess the meaning, it's understandable to the reader. There's basic information. The vocabulary is everyday, common topics, nothing fancy but perfectly fine. Basic control of grammar. There may still be errors, but the meaning is clear. And there are basic connectors such as and, but, and because, if you remember that from the second video. And the tone is appropriate, friendly, and informal, suitable for a friend. So that's a description of what we as teachers believe a good A2 level response to this task is. So we have a number of learners who've done that task. Here's one of them. Hi Pat, let's meet at the bus station in the town centre. I want to meet at 10 o'clock in the morning. I need to buy some new shoes and a jacket. See you tomorrow. And this example, all our teachers have looked through the examples and they think this one encapsulates those success criteria that we've just written. It matches it exactly. And we can justify why this learner is our A2 candidate of choice, is our benchmarked candidate. because it fulfills the success criteria and I can justify it. I can match up this learner's performance with my success criteria. And then we're using this example in blue as our benchmark. This is a bang-on exact A2. Have a look, there's a couple of other students here who've written something, an orange example and a pink example. Hopefully you can see the example in orange is clearly stronger than the blue. So this is probably high A2, maybe even getting into B1. And the pink example, there are a few errors there. It's not as detailed. You have to read a little bit to fully understand what they mean. So it's weaker than the example in blue. So it's low A2, possibly only A1. Again, justify why you think a learner is at a particular level with reference to your success criteria. Remember, your success criteria, you've taken the CFR descriptors and put it in the context of your task and your students. So justify your reasoning. Why is a student at a particular level? And have a debate with the other teachers. Really grapple with this. Come to a compromise. Hopefully you'll be able to come to a compromise. So everybody has the same understanding of what it means to be an A2 and then how the other students relate to that. Again, I just want to highlight one tool. This is called Write and Improve, writeandimprove.com. It's a really fantastic tool that learners can use. They go in, they can select a task that they want to respond to, they write their task, they press go or whatever it is, and then the AI corrects their task. In fact, it doesn't correct everything in their task. It shows the areas for improvement, and then it encourages the student to try again to amend their text in order to improve. And that's why it's called Write and Improve. And it's a great tool to get your students to do themselves, to give them autonomy, to help them practice their writing. And it does that job of providing a CFR level. I also talked about Text Inspector before. You can also use that for writing texts as well that your students have written. Okay. Your turn now. Here are some written performances from, we're going to pretend it's your students, and work together in small groups now to be standardized, to have the same opinion, and remember to justify your reasoning. That's it from me. Obviously, your day continues with Pablo and everybody there, but I'd like to thank you for your time, for you listening to my voice on this cloudy day in Cambridge. I hope it's sunnier where you are. Here's my email should you need to get in contact with me. I'm going to wish you all the best, and bye for now.
So thank you very much for that, Graham. So I'm going to start where Graham left off. Any questions? This is either very good or very bad, because he's really good at what he does, or he's really bad and he lost you all. So important things to consider. We're now going to look at a couple of texts and work with descriptors to try to place them in a very generic way and in a very unidimensional way. I mean, we're going to look at one text, we're going to look at one scale, and we're going to try to place it on that scale. But to give you a sense of, as Graham was describing a process, and you can make this as complex or complicated or elaborate as you need, basically. Keep it as simple as you can, make it as complex as you need. But it is very good to always include, like I mentioned that before, more than one view, more than one opinion, more than one context. Because the idea of standardization has to do with fairness. If I am a student in one school or one institution, and I write something or I perform at a certain level, whether I pass or fail, whether I am considered a strong learner or a weak learner for my level, should not depend on who my teacher is. if I am in course A or B at the same level in the same institution. And if this is going to be something that is used for bigger decisions like admission to teacher training or etc., or to put people in a kind of ranking to see who is going to be in the top 10 and who's going to get to have certain opportunities, there should be defensibility and there should be a fairness to it, if you're looking at the use perspective. Also, if you're thinking about teaching to a certain level, that perspective, forget about the stakes, forget about the big decisions. We should be looking at everything that is included. And sometimes we tend to be more narrow in terms of, I am looking at this thing I'm looking at. I am looking at this thing that I am focused on this class, but then maybe I am not taking a wider picture of everything around it. A very important thing that Graham mentioned there is the success criteria. And look at that great example he provided of the paragraph describing what he expected, well, what is expected of a good enough performance, sort of like, this is my benchmark, this is what to me describes and represents the level. And it included a number of angles and perspectives. So he was talking about the topics, he was talking about the language, he was talking about the organization, he was talking about the kind of activity done. Usually a good success criteria includes a number of perspectives, sort of a number of angles, and then different texts are going to be stronger in one, not so strong in another. For instance, in a Cambridge exam from B1 on for writing, we are looking at 4 assessment criteria. We have 4 columns of rubrics. So basically 4 descriptors of that. One for content, another one for communicative achievement, organization, language. Never mind. But the idea is that some texts are going to be really strong in one, not so strong in another, and that is going to balance. For speaking, we do a similar thing, where we have like an overall impression mark, but then we are also looking at specific sort of scales of things. And then some speakers are going to be stronger in interaction, others are going to be weaker in language and pronunciation, for instance. But those things balance because, remember, all performance is jagged. Everybody is imbalanced. Stronger here, not so high there. Is this making sense? So good success criteria, sometimes it's going to be very narrow. Like if I am teaching words, if I just taught my elementary student parts of the body, then my only success criteria is use the right word. So if I show you a picture of a head, don't say foot. But if I am looking at something like writing competence at levels B1, then I am going to have to look at a number of things at the same time. And the useful way to use the descriptors, another thing that Graham mentioned in one of the earlier videos, is to work backwards. So you begin with a descriptor, then you think, what does a good performance of this look like? And then you work backwards from there. What needs to be done well for this to happen? If you want to continue working backwards, I recommend this as an excellent way to use the Common European Framework to guide your curriculum and your planning, which is, if you want to reach a level A2, then look at the descriptors for A2 and decide which are going to be relevant for your group, for your learners, for your context. Then you say, okay, doing this at this level, what are the users, what are my learners doing that shows that they have done this well? And then you write your success criteria, what you expect to see, what Graham just did. And then you say, okay, looking at the place where my learners are beginning, what do I need to do? What do they need to develop? And what can I do to help them develop those things so that they can get to my success criteria, so that they can get to my destination? The good way, the advantage of planning like this, beginning at your objective, visualizing, describing the objective and working backwards, is that it makes it very easy to set success criteria, to know, so that for you to know and for your learners to know when they are being successful in progressing towards the goal. Does this make sense? Sounds useful? February is the right time of year to have this conversation about planning. This is where you see that the framework is not just about, I mean, we are focusing on more assessment-y things, like recognizing a level. But the same tools that you use to recognize a level give you the instruments to plan, give you the instruments to analyze in a certain performance, okay, what are the gaps in this learner? Okay, maybe my learner has the right language, has the right, uses all the right tools, but they're missing the interaction. So going back to the descriptors, what things should they be able to do from where they are to reach that level that they expect to be in? And this can be the sort of the bullet points in your planning or the bullet points in your remedial map. Make sense? So, here we're going to work, we worked with correspondence. Now we're going to work with creative writing. Yes, there is a descriptor for creative writing, and believe it or not, in the reading, for instance, there are beautiful descriptors that nobody ever checks for things like reading literature. Amazing. I mean, everybody thinks that this is about a bunch of really businessy, academic-y things, but it includes all kinds of weird stuff, all kinds of unexpected stuff. So, here are creative writing descriptors for A2 and B1. Have a look at the descriptors, have a look at the text, see where of the two would you roughly place this. And by the way, this was taken from a real exam. This is real candidate writing a real exam. This is why you will find mistakes. I mean, this is actual learner production. Not so easy, right?
For me, it's A2, but what happened with the mistakes?
Okay, we'll talk about that. So, okay. So there was a very good question here, which is, for me this is this level, but what about the errors in it? So, what about the errors in it? Number one, remember when we were looking at global descriptors for production and global descriptors for language, there was definitely a description of the level of non-correction, the level of difficulty in understanding. So in the production levels, in the production descriptors, this usually shows us the difficulty to understand somebody when they're speaking, how much effort you have to make. On the comprehension, there are the issues of how much speakers or writers need to adjust what they said or rephrase to be understood. We saw descriptors before that said things like, provided that they are explained in simple, clear, slow, blah, 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 blah. So there is nothing here. This is not a scale of perfect performance for this. And this is not a scale of things you can do excellent, things that you can show excellence in. Excellently, is that a word? So, honest question. Because I was thinking things you can do excellent, and there was something missing, but excellently felt weird. Anyway, Adriana, we can talk about that later. Anyway, you are expected to, it's not only allowed, the description is for human competence, not superhuman competence. So definitely error is included there. Error where, affecting what, is a different question. There is a degree of classic question with, I told you, for instance, that you can use parallel scales for assessing the same text. So you could be assessing this text for organization of information, punctuation, language, or punctuation, spelling, grammar. You could. Nothing wrong with that. What happens is that if your grammar is really bad, it is not going to be comprehensible. If you can still understand it, it's not bad enough. If your spelling is really bad, it's not a matter of different with one F or three N's. It's a matter of different spelled with B-H-W-Y. It's, really bad. So when one thing is really out of whack, it is going to impact everything else. So what do? You incorporate that into your success criteria. You incorporate that into your assessment scales or into your expectations of what good performance looks like. You have to. Otherwise, you're going to be failing everybody for no good reason. Or at least, you're going to be failing everybody for reasons that are not included in the framework, that the framework doesn't expect you, doesn't enable you to, or sanction. So, rephrasing, you can say that you are A2, but you have to improve such and such a thing. I'm going to take you, so I'll raise you. You are always going to say that, because there is no such thing as the A2 speaker. Remember the process Graham was describing. He said, and the way standardization usually works for production is you look at a number of texts and say, this is the one that looks more like what we are expecting. But you cannot just produce it in abstract. And it's not a perfect example of everything done to that level. No text is, it is very, very difficult to find like the A2 model. Even if you have a corpus of thousands and thousands of texts, which you could. If you think of all of the students that ever took CLE, you have a sample of thousands and thousands of pieces of writing. Which of those thousands of thousands is the perfect A1, A2, B1? Nobody really, because everybody is imbalanced in that way. Having said all that, hands up for A2. Okay, a reasonable amount. Hands up for B1. A lot of people did not raise their hands. You think I don't notice, but a teacher knows. Okay? So, those of you who said B1, let's begin with the top. Let's go top down. Which descriptors in B1 do you think best fit this, which are not present in A2? Hand up over there, Saavedra.
sorry. We were thinking, because we were talking, and this piece of writing has more detailed descriptions and more connectors, maybe not basic connectors like an A2 would have. So even though there are mistakes, it's more connected, more complex. And it's an imagined thing.
Hola, hola. Okay. So we have the imagined descriptor. No. Hola. So we have the imagined descriptor, and we have imagined in one of the descriptors that is giving us something. We have the degree of connection, and then you were thinking more of the overall production. Remember that here we are looking just at creative writing, but you would be looking at the overall written production, which we saw about 2 hours ago, so good memory. And then you were thinking more of the how elaborate the text is, which is a very good sign here. Then I was focusing more on these, but your answers are perfectly okay. So narrating a story, although this is telling, and if this is a retelling of an event, so this is a narration. A description of the event, a recent trip, then the real or imagined, and then accounts of experiences describing feelings and reactions in simple connected text. So simple connected. What is simple, what is not simple enough, or what is more than simple, is something you are going to have to decide. What is connected, what is less connected, what is more expected. If you were focusing on just developing written production, sort of if you were teaching a course that was very heavily geared towards writing, then you might have much stricter expectations. If you are teaching more like a general course, or if you're teaching primary and you're teaching younger learners, then there are certain degrees of organization in a text or certain cohesive devices that you would not expect to see as often, or in the same way as you would with a 17-year-old, with a 25-year-old, with a 50-year-old. So all of this is localized. And again, the way you would normally do this is by placing different scales, bringing together different people and doing something that looks more like the process Graham was describing. And a useful thing that was I want to signal a part of the thing that Graham was saying, that was embedded in the process, which is that usually the way we do this is through comparative judgment. So we know what we are looking at, and then we set a benchmark. And when you set a benchmark, the point of the benchmark is that from then on, your thinking is it better than this or not as good as this? Because that is an easier conversation to have. Instead of saying in absolute terms, this is better than this is what I expect or not, the best, the easiest way to do it, and the one that has been proven to work better, is to think of, we set a benchmark, we agree that this is the bang-on middle of the range, and then is it better than that, not as good as this, is a much easier judgment conversation to have. Does this make sense? So this is why rubrics work, because rubrics don't fill all the gaps, but rubrics give you, this is what we expect here, this is what we expect here. Does it look more like this or this? Using a rubric is the same, maybe, I'm never quite sure thing, but that's the way you do it. If you want to do it to a great degree of precision and blah, 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 there are methodologies to do it, but they are very intensive, they require a lot of work and resources. And they really become necessary if you're thinking of very specific applications. For you in the classroom or at the school level, if you sit down with the teachers who are teaching the same level and you say, okay, let's take a look at these 10 student productions that we have taken from last year. Which one do we think is the standard? Which one which ones do we think are really good? Which ones do we think are not good enough? And you come to an agreement on that, that is an excellent starting point to make better decisions and to explore how to apply these things in your lives. Okay? Okay, and here is an example, for the sake of time, because we are getting we're getting to the point where everybody has to go on with their lives. I'm going to, clearly this is shorter, so it was not going to be another B1, right? Which elements of A2 do you think that this is showing?
They have a chronological sequence that the other one doesn't have.
We have a chronological sequence. So first we put the fruits. When we arrived, we ate on the floor. So a very basic chronological sequence. Could it be more explicit? Yes. Could it be better? Could it be done better? Yes, but at this level, this is what we are expecting. So for me, it was more about the basic description of events and can tell a simple story. So this would actually be something that would be in the A2 plus range. But, again, specifically how you apply this will depend on which course you're teaching, what you expect. It's your decision. So, it's time to wrap up. I know, I'm sorry. We would be here all day, but we have been here enough of the day. So, we're going to do it very quickly and not so much the impairs things, but think of 2 things that you learned here, 2 things that you can bring to your classrooms, and 2 things you would like to expand on in a follow-up. Okay, this will be my homework for you. Sort of think of things that you're bringing home, things that you're taking from this. Maybe at the beginning we thought about expectations and what you knew, and some of the things that you said you knew were actually not a match for what we saw later, and some of them definitely were. I hope we were able, together with Graham, to answer some of the I would like to know, to turn them into things that I am taking home. Definitely think about, on your way home or on your way to school, on ways in which you can bring this to your classroom, because this only makes sense if you make it work. You can use this, you will definitely be working, if you're working with a course book, you will be working with a course book that is aligned to this. Think of how your course book is developing that. Think of how, if the expectations are that you will be reaching A2 or A1 plus or B1 at the end of your course, what should be my success criteria? What should happen? What do I need to do? Think of ways in which you can in practical ways engage with that. Also think about ways in which you can bring this into your classroom. I said there was going to be a digital takeaway. So I have set up a Google Drive folder with a number of files. A very simple tool. If it doesn't work, we will find, there is a possibility that I haven't been able to make it work really well. If for some reason it doesn't work or doesn't give you access, don't worry, we will make it happen. We will find a way of sending this to you in another way. So, what have I included there? Just the very, very basic tools. Number 1, things that you should already have, and if not, don't tell Mabel, which are the Nuevo Diseño Curricular de Lenguas Adicionales, which it should be your Bibles, and the Diseño Curricular is the document from 2021 setting the alignment. But by the way, if you look at the Nuevo Diseño Curricular, you will see, especially if you read the bits that nobody reads, which are all of the fundamentos, that the way in which competence and expectations are described are 100% coherent with everything that we have been saying. Because you can declare that you are aligning to the framework without doing anything about it, or you can actually align, which is what is happening, what has happened at the Nuevos Diseños. And the other things I have included, some of them in Spanish, some of them in English, some of them in both. So, first, the 2001 original CEFR. Then the 2020 companion volumes, in English and in Spanish. The framework has official versions in all of the languages of the European Union and beyond. The Spanish official version is done by Instituto Cervantes, and it is an official version of it, it's not somebody's translation. So you can include that, this is where, in the companion volume is where you would find all of these 520 different descriptors and scales and bits and pieces. So use it as a reference, read the introduction because the introduction is really interesting. It might be a bit dense at points, but it's really useful. The CFR alignment handbook that Graham was referring to, he was very humble when he was talking about it because he's actually one of the authors of that book. But he didn't even mention that, so I am mentioning it on his behalf. Anyway, remember, there is a lot of information there that you don't need because the bits that are about standardization of assessment and validation, nothing for you to worry about. And some of the other things are too big scale. If you're reading something and it feels like, when would I ever use this? Stop reading. Okay, this is just for reference. Just if you want to take a couple of ideas, okay, but this document is meant for lots of different uses. Most of them are probably beyond what you are looking for. And then the global scale and the self-assessment grid. The global scale is like an overall top-level description of what an A1 for reading, for written production looks like. It's like the most general descriptions. I have included them in Spanish, I believe, too, because these are useful to share with your students. And the really useful ones to share with your students are the self-assessment grids. Because the self-assessment grids is meant for learners. So the language there is, I can do this, and it is very simple. So you want to share these with your learners and say, by the end of this course, you will be able to say, I can do this. These are useful to share with parents, to use in your planning, but because the language and the concepts are simple, and they are meant for users, not teachers, not assessors, not curriculum specialists. These are meant for more like at the really ground level. This is where you would start. Again, Google Council of Europe, they have in their website, they have a section about the framework with all of the documents in all of the languages and a lot more information. They organize regular webinars and there is a lot, way, way, way more if you want to dig into. Today's plan was to give you an introduction. I hope this hasn't been too much information. And I hope this hasn't been intolerably dull or that you haven't wanted to scream at me, which you haven't, which has been very, very kind of you. Thank you very much to the LEDU for the invitation. It's an immense pleasure to have been here.
Thank you, Pablo, for being here with us, spending almost 5 hours with us on your birthday. This is the first of 2 seminars that we are planning to hold with Cambridge people. Probably a new one or the second one in September. Maybe we can invite Graham to be here in person. I've been already suggesting that. So, thank you very much to all of you for spending the morning with us. We will get all the materials to you somehow if the QR doesn't work. And let's keep on working. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.